What is known as I arises in the absence of the knowledge of the mind. This is self-knowledge. It's when the mind doesn't realize its own nature. This I is the seed of the tree known as mind. It grows in the field of the Supreme Self, which is also pervaded by the illusory power known as Maya. Thus, a division is created in that field and experience arises. I often mention the field of experiencing. This is different from the field in which this experience arises. The difference between experience and experiencing is experiencing is what is happening, and experience is the notion that there is something to be experienced and that there is an I experiencing it, there's a me that's experiencing it. With this, the determined faculty known as the buddhi arises. This is the discriminating intelligence. It's what identifies different aspects of what's going on. This is me, that's you, that's the world, these are things, this is a feeling, and so on. It's what puts names to things. Of course, it has no distinct form, as it is but the expanded form of the seed. Its nature is conceptualization, or notional, and it is also known as the mind, jiva, and void. Its nature is conceptualization, or notional. There's two ways of understanding that. One is that its nature is to form concepts about what's going on, that which is all we've got, actually. All we've got are concepts or notions about what's going on. But its nature, this very conceptualization itself, is notional. So we can see it as creating, its nature is to create concepts or notions, but that's what it is itself. The mind itself is notional. This is also known as the mind, jiva, and void. This is a discriminating intelligence. It's a cognitive process. That's what the mind is. It's what gives rise to the jiva, which is the notion of personal identity. And it's also known as void. Well, it isn't usually known as void, but what we've got here is a direct pointing to the nature of the mind. We inquire into the mind, we see that it's fundamentally tied up with notions of self. We look into it further and we see that there is no self. What is this I? So when the discriminating faculty, the buddhi, which is the cognitive process, when we look into it, we ultimately see it as void. The trunk of this tree is the body. So the I is the seed of the tree known as mind. And the trunk of this tree, the trunk of the mind, which arises from the seed of I, is the body. The body is something which we construct in order to accommodate all the notions that we have about perception and about identity. The movement of energy within it that results in its growth is the effect of psychological conditioning. And this is the attention which accumulates further notions in accordance with its own innate tendencies, which we could say are either genetic or from previous lives, and as a consequence of the environment, the culture, the society that it finds itself within. Its branches are long and they reach out to great distances. They are the finite sense experiences which are characterized by being and non-being. Well, it's not actually what we'd immediately think of, is it? We wouldn't immediately think that our finite sense experiences are characterized by being and non-being. We'd normally say that they're characterized by being. Whatever we sense, we'd say is real, and whatever we don't sense, we say is non-real. But this is culturally dependent. For some societies, ghosts, djinns, spirits are real. In our modern scientific culture, we've got this prejudice towards what we call sensory experience at the expense of the imagination. Whatever belongs to the realm of imagination and dream we regard as not real, although the experiences of the imagination and of the dream can be just as intense and vivid, if not more so, than our so-called everyday life. So our culture is defined by what we regard as real and non-real, as being and non-being. If we live in a religious culture, then God is an important reality. There's no doubt about the existence of God in such a culture. But if we live in a more questioning and thoughtful society, then notions of God can either disappear or become slightly more sophisticated. So whatever we regard as being and non-being, there's a very fundamental emotional attitude to both these categories. Its fruits are good and evil, pleasure and pain, happiness and unhappiness. Sense experiences are either pleasant or unpleasant. They are either pleasurable or painful. They could be neutral, but we tend not to notice the neutral ones. It's the pleasurable ones and the painful ones. We see it in these terms. But not only that, the ones which are unpleasant, we can start getting quite moralistic about. If there are things in ourselves which we find hard to come to terms with, we might regard them as evil. This is a vicious tree. Endeavour every moment to cut down its branches and to uproot it. We don't want to get caught up in this tree. We don't want to get entangled with it. We can step aside from it. We can turn the attention away from it. You can do this in two stages if you like. We can turn the attention to something within our body, an emotional centre, or to the breathing, or to a point in the forehead. And once we've done that, then we can examine the nature of the attention itself. We bring the attention home and then turn it onto itself. This is one way of going about it. And this is how we can cut down the branches of our conditioning. Just focusing on something won't do it. You have to focus on the focusing. Its branches too are of the nature of conditioning, of concepts and of percepts. They, the branches, are endowed with the fruits of all these. If you remain unattached to them, unconcerned about them, and without identifying yourself with them, through the strength of your intelligence, consciousness, these vasanas are greatly weakened. You will then be able to uproot the tree altogether. The destruction of the branches is secondary. The primary thing is to uproot it. So we can't just say don't engage with it, because you cannot follow that advice. You can only do this from self-realization. Uprooting the tree doesn't lead to self-realization. It's self-realization which leads to the uprooting of the tree. How is the tree to be uprooted? By engaging oneself in the inquiry into the nature of the self. Who am I? This inquiry is the fire in which the very seed and the very roots of the tree known as chitta, mind, are burnt completely.